Recently, the governor of Georgia signed Senate Bill 202 into law. One of the provisions in that law is in regards to voter ID and absentee balloting. Until now, several organizations like the NAACP have filed lawsuits to challenge it. Let me explain. Before the new law took effect, to apply for an absentee ballot, you simply had to fill out a form with your name and address, birth date, etc., and sign it. Previously, with absentee ballots, the Board of Elections would match your signature on the ballot with the signature they have on file. But there are issues with signature match. It's time-consuming. For example, signatures change over time, and if a signature is different enough, the election board, by law, has to reach out and notify the voter. According to the Secretary of State, 2,011 absentee ballots were ultimately rejected in the November 2020 election because of missing or non-matching signatures. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, but if you're an eligible voter and your ballot has been rejected because your signature didn't match, you'd be upset, right? Let's say that the candidate you voted for lost in a tight race by just a few hundred votes. What if your candidate lost by 109 votes? I mean, rejected votes in that race probably didn't make a difference, but would you bet your life on it? Well, how about an election where a candidate won by a 6-vote margin? Now I'll ask you again. If you voted for the candidate that lost by 6 votes and your ballot was rejected, wouldn't you wonder how many more ballots were rejected, or whether or not it would have made a difference and swung the race for the losing candidate? Yeah, that's what I thought. So with that, Georgia is now requiring that when you request an absentee ballot and send in the actual ballot, that you write down your driver's license or state ID number and the last 4 digits of your social security number. If you don't have any of those, you have to include a photocopy or electronic copy of a valid US passport ID, valid US military photo ID, or a valid tribal photo ID. If you don't have any of those, you can include a copy of a current utility bill, bank statement, government check, paycheck, or other government document that shows your name and address. In other words, you have options. And while some may consider this a bit of a hassle, it is consistent with other provisions in the law. Because you need to show your ID at a polling place to prove your identity before you can cast your ballot. And what has so many on the left up in arms is if you don't have any of these, you need to attach a copy of one of these every single time that you apply for an absentee ballot and when you mail in your absentee ballot. Is it a hassle? Maybe, but it's not stopping anyone from voting by mail. Now, anecdotally, you know and I know that most people have a state-issued ID. Not all, but most. For example, some may have let their license or ID expire. Maybe their license was revoked and they haven't replaced it with a state ID. Or maybe they just lost it. Things happen. Regardless, according to Georgia State Senator Larry Walker, the number of voters without state-issued ID is very, very low.
The Secretary of State's office tells me that of the voter registration rolls on the rolls, 97% of Georgia's registered voters have either a Georgia driver's license number or a state-issued ID number. 97%.
You hear that, everyone? 97% of all registered voters have a driver's license or state ID number on file. I know you're shocked. And that percentage is high for a reason. Because when you apply for one of these at the DMV, unless you opt out, you are automatically registered to vote. And that's weird, right? I mean, it's almost like Georgia wants people to vote. Now, as far as the remaining 3%, they can vote in person using a voter ID card, which Georgia offers for free. You know, because voter suppression. Or they can use a federal or state government ID, passport, military ID, tribal ID, etc. Or they can vote by mail simply by using the last 4 digits of their social security number. And most Americans have a social security number. And that means that the amount of people who have to attach a copy of an acceptable document to their ballots has to be super low, right? Well, activist organizations don't see it that way. And currently, there are 3 lawsuits challenging the new voter laws. Because feelings. The first of those lawsuits is from the NAACP. The new absentee ballot ID requirements mandate that voters include a Georgia driver's license number or a Georgia state ID number on their absentee ballot application. If they have neither, voters are required to copy another form of acceptable voter ID and attach the copies of ID documents along with other identifying information to both their absentee ballot applications and inside the absentee ballot envelope when returning the voted ballot. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll notice that there is something missing here. They left out the important detail that if a voter doesn't have a state-issued ID, that they can simply put the last 4 digits of their social security number. They're intentionally being deceptive because most US citizens have a social security number. I mean, who doesn't have at minimum a social security number? This fact decimates their argument, but they're gonna try anyway. So it's not just the NAACP being deceptive, it's also fake Georgia Governor Stacey Abrams' organization, the New Georgia Project. In their complaint they write, the General Assembly enacted a requirement that voters requesting an absentee ballot submit with their application their driver's license number, their personal identification number on a state-issued personal identification card, or a photocopy of other specified forms of identification. Again, they left out the very important provision in the law that if you don't have a photo ID, you can submit your social security number. These activists and the news media won't tell you what's actually in the law, so for absolute clarity, I guess it's up to me. If the elector does not have a Georgia driver's license or state identification card, the elector shall so affirm in the space provided on the outer oath envelope and print the last 4 digits of his or her social security number in the space provided. So to put it simply, the voter checks a box indicating that they don't have a driver's license or a state ID. And then they write down the last 4 digits of their social and they're done. And Stacey Abrams and the NAACP left out that detail because it would destroy their narrative of voter suppression. That narrative includes this claim. According to one national study, as many as 25% of Black voters do not possess a current and valid form of government-issued photo ID, compared with 11% of voters of all races. The national study that is being referred to is from the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University, and there are some major problems with it. First of all, it's not a study. It's a 4-day telephone survey that was conducted in 2006, consisting of a whopping 987 randomly selected voting age American citizens. In the summary, the Brennan Center claims that the survey showed that millions of American citizens do not have government-issued photo identification, such as a driver's license or passport. That's a lie. The survey doesn't show that, because the question they asked respondents was the following. Do you have a current unexpired government-issued ID with your picture on it, like a driver's license or military ID? They asked if it was current, not if they had a photo ID in general. And based on the responses of that one question, the Brennan Center somehow deduced that African American citizens disproportionately lack photo identification. 25% of African American voting age citizens have no current government-issued photo ID, compared to 8% of white voting age citizens. But the Brennan Center won't show you how they came to this conclusion in their methodology. There's no demographic breakdown by age or race, gender, whether these people were actual or likely voters, even registered voters, or even eligible to vote at all. They do, however, state that the results of this survey were weighted to account for underrepresentation of race. I'm guessing the results of that survey were weighted so that they could get the results they wanted. Anyway, this flawed survey was conducted in 2006. For some reason, the Brennan Center hasn't bothered to conduct a follow-up survey. I mean, it has been 15 years. But then again, why would they want to do it over? They got the answer they wanted. Why fix something that isn't broken? The third lawsuit is from an organization called Asian Americans Advancing Justice in Atlanta. I wonder if they will mention that you can use your social security number as an identifier. Let's take a look. In their complaint, AAAJA claims that the law imposes burdensome voter identification requirements. Yeah, they're not off to a good start, huh? Specifically, Section 25 of SB 202 newly requires that the voter provide their Georgia driver's license or Georgia state ID number in addition to the voter's registration address and date of birth. Wait, are they saying that writing down your address and date of birth is burdensome? SB 202 further demands that a voter who does not have a Georgia driver's license or state ID card instead provide a photocopy or an electronic image of a utility bill, bank statement, blah, 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 blah. And we're 0 for 3. Just like the other two lawsuits, AAAJA skipped over the whole part of the law that allows for voters without state-issued ID to simply write down the last 4 digits of their social security number down in a box. I know, you're shocked. The lawsuit also makes the claim that AAPIs are less likely to have a driver's license than white Americans. So what this Asian American organization is saying, without proof I might add, is that Asian Americans are less likely to have a driver's license. But notice that they didn't say that they are less likely to have state ID cards. And of course, they didn't mention anything about social security numbers either, and that's deceptive. Okay, so let's recap. In each of the 3 lawsuits, there is no mention of voters being able to use a social security number to cast an absentee ballot. Because you know why. And let's be honest here. The reality is that these organizations spend millions of dollars each election cycle to sign minorities up to vote. And for only one reason. Is that reason because they're trying to get more people involved in the election process? No, it's strictly because those voters are likely to vote Democrat, plain and simple. But if they really cared about minorities, then why wouldn't these organizations spend time and resources on initiatives to get these communities the state-issued IDs that they supposedly don't have? I mean, for starters, it would eliminate the need to complain about voter ID laws. Or maybe they didn't bother because it's not an actual problem. Either way, it's very clear that people like Stacey Abrams and the New Georgia Project see their communities as a commodity. They don't want to actually help them. They only want their votes because they only care about one thing: power. And on that sad note, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, sharing, and hitting that like button, and hope to see you next time. If there is a next time.